And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of Buckeye Talk live after Ohio State's 38-14 win over Penn State to improve to 8-0. And what is that, 5-0 in Big Ten play now for a team who has its first offering as a college football playoff resume is now complete after this game. Those first rankings come out on Tuesday. And we'll get into some of that talk today. We'll get into some Michigan conversations. But I wanted to start with this, Stefan. I don't know. Overall thoughts, 38-14. Did it go the way you thought it was going to go? Were there some things that were maybe you weren't expecting? Just what you think?
I thought all around this was probably, at least offensively, Ohio State's best game. It felt like every facet of the offense was clicking, was explosive, obviously pointing more toward the running game and kind of the explosiveness we saw there. Defensively, I think maybe Penn State was the first team this season to kind of poke at some things. At least in terms of, Ohio State's rush defense. I thought Penn State, did a pretty good job offensively with its game plan. I just think didn't really have the personnel to, kind of pop an explosive play in the passing attack to maybe build off of what they were able to do in the rushing game. But I think that's also, maybe nitpicking to an extent because I think this Ohio State defense is fine. And the way they played in the second half, reminded us just how good they are. So it was... For how close the game was at halftime, definitely closer than I think most of us expected. Maybe Gillis being the outlier because I know he kind of picked this game to be closer than Steven and I did. But I thought at halftime it was maybe closer than we thought. But as I was driving home from the stadium, I was kind of thinking back and I'm telling myself it's closer than we thought. But there was also a mistake that you couldn't have predicted, right? Ohio State turning it over, that close to its own end zone, is not something you necessarily predict. So you kind of take out a poor sequence there from Ohio State, and it's about as dominant as most people had predicted this game to go. So I was really impressed. We've come on Buckeye Talk, immediately post game quite a few times and maybe nitpicked a bit what Ohio State has done. And it was against Illinois. We weren't overly impressed with how much they were running it and how they were running it. Wisconsin, I thought we were pretty positive, but there were definitely some questions about the right side of the offensive line. Minnesota game overall pretty good, but Ohio game struggles in the red zone. Like every game's kind of had something. There wasn't a ton of that. I was just thoroughly impressed with the way Ohio State handled business, and honestly, the way that they didn't flinch after Penn State made things tighter than we thought they should have been. And I think a lot of this just goes back to the conversations we continue to have about Ohio State and what separates them from a lot of different programs. I can't get the image of Brian Kelly out of my head of him just like going off on a reporter for pointing out struggles in the running game after a 21-10 home win against Florida. And then you talk to Ryan Day post game and he's like, first of all, bringing up the fumble time and time again, like to the point where he was like, hey, I need to stop bringing this up because I keep bringing it up. But he's also like, they're up 3 at halftime and it feels like they're down 21. Like there's so few programs that go about their business that way and then respond in the face of adversity when it's like, ooh, you go on Twitter, so everyone's like, ooh, like Penn State, look at what they're doing in Columbus. And then Ohio State comes on and just beats the hell out of them in the second half. Like there's not many teams outside of Indiana, really outside of just Indiana. There has not been a team that's handled business in the way that Ohio State has this year. I think A&M has even had some like close games that are maybe a bit tighter than you would like. Ohio State and Indiana, it feels like and I'm watching the end of the Indiana game right now, like it feels like you watch 5 minutes of the game and you're like, okay, interesting. Like there's always like a 5-minute stretch in Ohio State and Indiana games where you're like, that was weird. And then the other 55 minutes, they just beat the hell out of you. And like this was a thoroughly impressive performance by Ohio State outside of a stretch where CJ Donaldson has a fumble and Penn State takes advantage of it. Like outside of that, it was about as dominant as you could ask for.
I want to apologize if my connection looks crazy. AT&T is failing me today, so I'm using my hotspot. Listen, all transparency here at Buckeye Talk. So if it's not always clear with as far as my visual, I do apologize for that. Yeah, let's start with that. I think one of the funniest things we do as media members is when we show up at halftime of a football game we're clearly not watching and just look at the box score and go, ooh, this is kind of interesting. Because then we don't follow up at the end when the thing ends up not being interesting. And I noticed that with a lot of national media how they were all tweeting how close the Ohio State Penn State game was without context whatsoever, without the context that, Ohio State was about to go up at worst, Gillis 20-7 at halftime, and then CJ Donaldson fumbled on the first play of that 2-minute drill, and so obviously Penn State takes advantage of that. So now in the fourth game, and never those people on the back, and they do every team out there. So it's not just an Ohio State issue. They do it with a lot of different teams out there, but Ohio State, Gillis, is essentially a mistake you can't plan for away from being able to say they 100% dominated this game or 100% in complete control of this game, right? Is that a fair assessment of how that first half went?
No, because they were in control of it even with it. Like there was never a moment that I thought, like, there was never a moment that I thought, like, this is trouble. And like, I see what people are saying when it's like, hey, Ohio State's farting around against Penn State, and oh, look, it's, man, like, it was 17-14 at half, right? Like, it was 7-0 and then 10-7. Like it was within spitting distance. It was just one of those things where, like, if you watch the game, you're like, this is kind of a butt kicking, and Ohio State has not really taken care of it. Like maybe they could have or whatever. But like we looked at each other, and like, you asked me the question, or Stefan asked the question, and I was like, they were like, should Ohio State be up by more when it was 10-7? And I was like, I don't know, man. They've had 2 possessions. They scored 10 points. They're averaging 5 points a possession, and they're on track to score 35 to 42 points. And they were on track to score 35 to 42 points. And they kind of scored right in the middle of that. And it's like, they were averaging like a degree of yards where you're like, Penn State's in trouble. Like, Eric, I think, has a good point in the chat. This is what I wrote about after the game. Like, we watched that game and we were like, turnover in your own end. Maybe they get too not complacent, but they get too scared and they run the ball a little bit. The offensive line did not play well in the first half. I think they definitely got their S together, to say it bluntly, in the second half. They figured it out, but the offensive line was not good in the first half. Penn State definitely did some things. There were a couple, like Chaz Coleman beat Hinsman pretty clean. Saraveld had a couple of his worst whiffs of the season, and that's a credit to Saraveld because we noticed them. Like, Saraveld has not really gotten beat all year, and there were one or two plays where he got beat. Like, Julian Sayin scrambled out of that play on 3rd and 5, and Penn State had just gotten a touchdown. They were down 10-7. It's like, man, Penn State gets the ball back. You know, like, you're saying, oh, well, Ohio State, they were one play away. Penn State's looking at it like, if we let Julian Sayin, or if we keep him in contain, we're getting the ball back and it's 10-7 and the whole thing's different, right? So Ohio State was in control the whole way. And like I said, they didn't fall into the pitfalls of what could have been Michigan. Like, or what you guys were pointing out, like, I was still up in the press box. You guys tell the story all the time where you guys were down in the tunnel for the national championship game, and Ohio State was up 31-7, and then 31-15, and then 31-23, and you guys were like, "Oh, what are they doing? Why are they taking their foot off the gas?" And they didn't do that. They avoided that, and that's my biggest takeaway, is that they kept Penn State on their heels, and I mean, that's why it was such a dominant win, because they didn't let up.
Okay, so there's a couple of hats I want to talk about, and I'm going to let you guys pick the order we're doing. Here are the options. Julian Sayin, world beater, the world one hat. And I guess we can throw JJ and Carnell too. Julian, JJ, and Carnell, the world beaters. One hat. Hat number 2 is mark down where we think Ohio State's going to be on Tuesday when the first college football playoff rankings come out. That's hat number 2. Hat number 3. Michigan. So where would you, Stefan, you first. Which of those 3 hats would you like to start?
Gillis, I think Gillis and I are laughing because we didn't hear hat number 3. So let's start with hat number 1.
Hat number 3 was Michigan. This is going to be fun.
Yeah,
Thanks,
hat number 1. Hat number 1.
Okay. Julian Sayin, the world beater. 20-23 for 316 and 4 touchdowns and 2 carries for 15 yards, where one was a 9-yard scramble that told us everything we need to know about his mobility, and then a QB sneak near the end of the game. We all gave him A pluses in our video that you can go check out as well. But I don't know. I don't know who's supposed to stop this version of it. When he's doing that, when Jeremiah and Carnell are doing what they're doing, I don't know. Is this the best version of an Ohio State passing attack we've seen? And that's a hyperbolic statement. I understand. But these three, Jeremiah, Carnell, and Julian, and what they're doing, whether it's deep, whether it's middle, whether it's intermediate, whether it's short, regardless of what it is this the best version of what we've seen from Ohio State's passing attack?
I think so. I think so. And I think the reason I say that is because of what they did outside of the passing attack. I think the passing attack certainly helped them establish some things. But when I talked about earlier, when we talked about, our initial takeaways from this game, is like what stood out to me was the all-around effort. And I think that's why Ohio State so effectively was able to take the top off the defense and get some of these deep shots going with its receivers. Like, all these different personnel packages and groupings and formations. And the first drive alone, there was a 3 tight end formation. There was a formation with 2 tight ends in the backfield. There was the I formation. I'm pretty sure on the first drive, they had the I formation with Roberts in at fullback. They had 5 wide on a play where on the third down, they converted to Jeremiah Smith. Like, they ran everything that we talked about them tinkering with at the start of the year and not necessarily working. And instead of throwing that stuff out, they improved on it. So that's the part that's scary to me, is like they're becoming unpredictable, not just in the sense of like what's going to happen after they snap the ball. They're becoming unpredictable in terms of like personnel groupings and like what they're going to bring out there. Like, Stephen looked at me at one point and was like, on that first drive, it was like, they're doing the thing where they just keep substituting. I'm like, yeah, but it's working. Like, Penn State's being forced to go against 3 tight ends, and on the next play, it's 5 wide. Like, what is Jim Knowles supposed to do in terms of like preparing for what any given play is going to be from Ohio State, whether it be formation or the play call itself? So that's the fascinating part about it is when this is clicking in every other area, when the run game is working as it is, when it's the intermediate game is working, the quick game is working, and now Julian Sayin is also showing some mobility. It's like everything's working. And oh, by the way, Jeremiah Smith is 50 yards down the field and he's wide open. Right, like I couldn't get the sound out of my head of the touchdown against Oregon, the deep shot where McAfee's on the like alternate broadcast being like, Jeremiah Smith is wide ass open. Like, that's what I just kept thinking of when they were taking those shots to Carnell and Jeremiah, because even when it looked like they were covered, they were open because they're just always open. So yes, this is the best their passing attack has looked, especially with the deep balls. And when you see Julian Sayin's accuracy even on the deep balls, it is crazy to think like how often they can take those shots and execute, but it becomes that much better when everything else is clicking. And I think they did it in a way where it didn't feel like they were trying to establish something in order for that to open up. It felt like there was times where, I mean, Jeremiah Smith said postgame, like, defense is playing quarters and they're still taking a deep shot. Like, take those shots. Don't force the defense to come in. Defenses aren't going to do that against you. Take those shots so that the other stuff opens up. And now they really don't know what to do, because even when they think they're protecting against the deep ball, they can't. And then also you're opening up the intermediate stuff in the run game. It's just, you become so versatile and unpredictable. I really don't know who slows them down. Like, I don't, like, Indiana's defense is really good. They're a little banged up right now. They're a little banged up. Elijah Surratt came out in this game early. I just saw. So like, we'll see what happens with injuries and stuff there too. But it's like, it's not like A&M's defense has looked, like Georgia 2022 or 2023, right? Like, every team defensively has shown some flaws to some extent where it's like, maybe it's a bad answer, but like, I don't really know how you slow them down when things are clicking like that, right? If it almost feels like Julian Sayin has to have an off day, or someone has to really get after the passer in terms of like an edge rusher or something like that, for this not to work at least somewhat close to what we saw against Penn State. If this is what it's clicking like, I don't know who slows them down.
It to me, it just comes down to like, what kind of game do you want to play? And Ohio State can play that kind of game. And I'm not saying Ohio State should let other teams dictate, But if it's a game where Ohio State thinks that they can take advantage of you down the field, they'll do that. Ohio State thinks it's a game where 12 personnel with 2 tight ends on the field and, doing all kinds of crazy sort of packages with Kazmarek and Christian and Claire and all these other people, like they could do that. And that to me is kind of really what I think they're looking for, right? It's like almost like a basketball player, like developing a left hand, right? It's like you always hear, oh, he can't go to his left. You can't shoot from this. It's like, all right, well, force us into the corner and we're going to do that. And I think that was, it all kind of relates to Michigan, right? Like it all kind of goes around it. But like one of the things with Michigan last year was like they tried to win the rushing battle, which I'm not saying was good or smart or whatever. It was dumb that they did that, and they should have definitely expanded outwards. But they couldn't win that type of way. They couldn't win, like Stefan was saying, where it's like you have all this kind of formations and position groups and whatever. And now Ohio State, I think, is able to say, okay, you hit our fastball. Let's throw the splitter. Oh, you stopped the splitter too? Wow, that's kind of crazy. That's never happened before. Here comes the sweeping hook. And, here comes this. Here comes the knuckleball. Here comes that. And they could just keep doing that over and over and over and over again. And what defense can match up with that? You can stop their passing attack. If you have a good enough secondary, I'll give some team out there, some hypothetical team, credit and say, like, let's say they have a really good secondary and JJ has 1 catch for 3 yards again. And, they load it up and they play really well in the secondary, and Julian Sayin has an off night and he throws 2 picks and blah, 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 blah. All right, you can stop that. But now I think Ohio State is saying, we've got so many different ways to beat you that we're countering, and we kind of have like 3 different fastballs. It's like a 4-seam, a 2-seam, and I don't know, what would that be? A gyro ball? I don't know. Like they've got something going on, and it's just so impossible to defend.
Yeah, that secondary that can stop Ohio State's wide receivers, it does exist in the National Football League. I think this is probably the most complete roster they've had, right? And that doesn't mean that everything is a 10 out of 10, but Bo Jackson showed that they can be explosive in the run game today. If necessary, he had 13 carries for 105 yards, and 51 of those yards came in 1 play. Okay, so there's the explosiveness in the run game you're looking for. There's a tight end who, if they really wanted to get Max Clare involved, I know he only had 1 catch for 6 yards today, but he can be a give me the ball 5 times and I turned it into 80-plus yards guy, right? They got Brandon Ennis a little bit more involved today, 4 catches for 41 yards, where he was doing some stuff after the catch. And then Jeremiah and Carnell are – they're Jeremiah and Carnell, right? And I think Julian showed enough as a runner, Stefan, that it's something you have to account for, and not necessarily in a world where they're going to be doing a bunch of read options, but more in a sense of just because you won your one-on-one with a tackle doesn't mean that it's going to be a negative play for Ohio State. In fact, I think that 9-yard run, I think we learned more about Julian Sayin today in that 9-yard run than a bunch of deep shots showed us, because we already knew about that. He's been showing that to us for the last month or so. But making some plays with his legs today, and not just keeping a drive alive and rolling out right and making a throw, but like putting your foot in the ground and getting upfield for 9 yards, that's like the trump card. Because if you were looking for a flaw in Julian Sayin's game, that is no longer that. He just showed us that today.
Yeah. That 9-yard run, I think, is what's going to, or scramble, I guess, run, whatever you want to call it, is I think what's maybe going to stick with people most coming out of this game, because we knew that the deep ball was a part of Ohio State's offense. We knew intermediate, medium, short passing game behind the line of scrimmage, screen passing game, like that was all part of this offense. We knew, even if it wasn't always successful, that there are elements to Ohio State's running game that work. What was kind of the one thing we didn't really know for sure? Julian Sayin's mobility. And it's the CJ Stroud comparisons to this guy have always been there because of the arm talent, but that was something we talked about in the offseason too, of like, what if another comparison to CJ Stroud is that he is not a mobile quarterback in the sense of Justin Fields or even Will Howard, but he's mobile in the sense of CJ Stroud being able to buy you 5 yards when you need to buy 5 yards, being able to get out of a sack and throw the ball away when you need to just throw the ball away and keep yourself, ahead of the sticks. Like these little things, that's a whole nother element to this offense that you have to respect. And we saw against Wisconsin, I think on one of those RPOs, he kept and had a few yards himself. Like he's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not Lamar Jackson, right? He's not Justin Fields. But I don't know. He could be CJ Stroud and just get out of the pocket and get you 2 yards instead of a 5-yard loss. And if you can't get Ohio State behind the sticks, then it's really hard to slow down this offense. So that I'm writing about that for cleveland.com on Sunday morning of just he showed us another element to his game. Like Ohio State just added an ingredient to this recipe for its offense. Okay, this offense just got another element added to it. It's pretty scary to think about. Although I will say, Ryan Day said it, Julian Sayin said it. Talked to Julian Sayin's high school coach, Thad McNeil, who was in the press room with us after the pressers. One hand on the ball. Can't do that. If you're going to run, tuck and run. Hold on to that thing. Hold on to the rock because they couldn't afford another fumble in that game. But if that's the one that you're going to nitpick, then I think Julian Sayin's in a pretty good spot. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it's updated yet with this Indiana game. I think Mendoza's done playing. So let me see if it's updated on some of the apps. But I'm pretty sure when the game ended, Sayin was the betting favorite for the Heisman. Let me see if that's updated at all.
Oh.
Yeah. Julian Sayin's a betting favorite. I'm seeing him at plus 160, Mendoza at plus 220. So we'll see. Maybe when the Indiana game ends, it updates. But if he's not number one, then he's going to be number two. Like Julian Sayin is now the Heisman favorite. Like it is not hyperbole for us to say, hey, can Julian Sayin win the Heisman? It's not being a homer or being too close to Ohio State to say, can Julian Sayin win the Heisman? Like he is the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. And he's going to be at Ohio State at least one more year. As is Jeremiah Smith.
I think it is fair to say that the worst throw or worst decision he made all year was a throw in the second game of the year against Grambling when he threw the out route at the end zone where it was like, man, that was pretty easy to see that was an out route and he let the DB jump it. It wasn't a great throw. It wasn't a great read.
I think that was his only. The pick against Ohio wasn't great either, but
the pick against Ohio, that's fair. But like the thing that I talked about this in our video after the game, I use the basketball metaphor where it's like, you're not missing your layups, but this is very much like if you like baseball, like Adam Dunn was one of my favorite baseball players ever because he operates by the tried and true greatest thing in the world with baseball: swing hard and hope you hit it. And if he hit it, it was going 475 feet. And he was also probably going to lead the league in strikeouts or be up there in strikeouts, right? Like Chris Davis was like that. Adam Dunn was like that. Well, imagine if you just took like Cal Raleigh this year in Seattle and made him a 310 hitter, right? Like that's the thing. He's hitting the deep shots and he's not missing the layup stuff. He's not.
And he could also lay down a bunt.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. He could lay down a suicide squeeze. But like that's the thing that I like with how like Ohio State quarterbacks that have been great have done that too. But like that was the thing with Howard. Like Howard really couldn't hit the home run for you like you would have wanted. He could probably get you a couple singles and get you a decent on base percentage, but he wasn't hitting the deep shots like you thought or like you saw Julian Sayin do today, right? Like Julian Sayin was hitting some stuff where it was like, wow, that's impressive. He hit that guy in stride. He like JJ broke a double team by himself and he hit him down the field behind the defense in stride. Like Julian is not giving defenses an inch because it'd be like, imagine if his completion percentage was a few points lower and all of a sudden, you get 2nd and 6 turns to 3rd and 6 because you misfire on a throw or you whatever. Like that's what he's keeping this team out of. That's the underrated part of this. And there's probably some numbers that back this up that I can look into, as the weeks go on. But like, he's not letting Ohio State get into negative situations because somebody's catching the ball every single time. Somebody's getting the ball in Ohio State's uniform literally 4 out of every 5 times. That's unbelievable as a passer.
Ohio State's offense has always had this element of efficient explosiveness. And I think Julian Sayin takes that to a different level, right? Because CJ Stroud was above 70%. his first year as a starter in 2021. I think he was under it in 2022. Justin Fields was like flirting with 70% in 2019. In 2020, he was above it for like the first 2 or 3 games of the year, and then the Indiana game happened. I'm not remembering off the top of my head if he was above it by the end of the year. Dwayne, I think was of 70%. I would check these things, but as the people who are been here from it, my internet's not doing great today, so I'm on a hotspot, so I'm trying to limit how much other things I'm doing other than just talking. So if one of you could check those things for me, that'd be great. It'd be great to have producer Brendan I told him to go be a cop. So that's on me why he's not here today. Shout out to producer Brennan, though. But I think Will Howard was above 70%, but it wasn't always explosive, right? To Andrew's point, it's like you're efficient, but when it was time to be explosive, it was kind of hit or miss. So what's the point of it if you can't be explosive along with it? I think Kyle McCord had explosive parts. Like he had a few throws that were explosive, but both the efficiency and the explosiveness weren't consistent enough. Separate from each other, let alone tying them together. Julian Sayin, 13.8 yards per attempt on 23 throws is how you get 316 yards. Like the fact that you don't even have to throw it 25 times and you can have 100 plus yards and 4 touchdowns. That's the point, right? That's where you get to an element of like, it looks like balance, but it's not really balance. You threw it 23 times and you ran it 32 times. That's because you turned 23 throws into 316 yards. So it allowed you to continue to work out the run game. And then you get to the second half and you look up and you average 5.1 yards per carry, which I don't think is bad. But it started with the explosiveness in the pass game. And you guys are using all these baseball metaphors. I don't know who these people are. I was going to call him the Kevin Durant of college football because Kevin Durant flirts with 40, 50, 90 every single year while averaging 30. And that's a perfect score in the NBA. And I think that's what he is a perfect passer in college football. Literally, he's 3 throws away from perfect, where one of the throws got dropped and another one he threw away. So he had like one actual, I threw the ball to a receiver and it just was an incompletion and it wasn't anybody's fault or there's no context to it. And I don't know how much of this is him and how accurate he is as a passer, or how much of it is Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith are unguardable. Because, right, yeah, Julian dropped that ball to JJ in a bucket. But also, JJ beat 2 dudes to get open downfield. Julian puts a ball in a spot, whether it's today or it was 2 weeks ago against Wisconsin, Stefan, where only Carnell Tate could get it or nobody's going to get it. But also Carnell Tate is going to get it because nobody else but Carnell Tate can get it. And that's what makes them so lethal. Both ends of the string are, I'm the only person in the country who can do this thing. And there's no answer for that, I think, in college football, of a secondary that has multiple moving parts to stop a string where both ends of it are, how come you didn't stop it? Because that guy, who's stopping that guy from doing this, right? Like, it's insane to think about that way. And if it's starting to be explosive in the run game, that's where you get balance, and that's where you get, you have to think about all these different weapons. You're right, Stefan. And we had, I guess, what's the next hat then? I think that wraps up that hat. We just spent 28 minutes talking about how amazing Julian Sayin is. And you're right, Stefan. He's the Heisman favorite now, and it does not matter to me. Because for me, whether he was a favorite or not coming out of this game, here's where I'm at with Julian Sayin. Beat Michigan, you win the Heisman. And yeah, we can spend another 30 minutes talking about all the context behind it. And we'll spend an hour and 15 minutes doing it on Wednesday when we talk about Heisman Trophy things. But to me, that's what it boils down to, because I just think Marcel Reed can beat him out if it comes down to those two. I don't think Ty Simpson can beat him out if it comes down to those two. And if it comes down to Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin, it's going to be whoever wins in Indianapolis. And I don't think Indiana can beat Ohio State at Indianapolis. So beat Michigan, you're the Heisman. Don't beat Michigan, you're CJ Stroud. Well, we're saying you probably would have won the Heisman if you had beaten Michigan. So it's that simple for me. So there's that hat.
So you want to talk
Gillis,
Michigan now then?
We got 2. I mean, yeah, we can decide. Gillis, what you want? You want Michigan hat or you want CFP hat?
I think CFP hat is a good segue to Tuesday, so let's go Michigan. Let's
Okay.
start with Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a couple of things
Go
from our
ahead.
texters before we do that. 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. From the 740, needs to be some discussion on the current continued overly conservative call before half and why are they continuing to hold back when they know they can do whatever they like. I think that plays into what you were talking about earlier, Stefan, but that's another way to ask a Michigan question. And then from the 614, can you spend 3 minutes talking fans off the ledge of Dave vomiting himself in the Michigan game again based on the first half of today's game? So a lot of people are focusing on the second half. Gillis, you picked the hat, so you get to go first because you also wrote about this. If you are an Ohio State fan and you just watched that Penn State game, should you be more optimistic, less optimistic, or nothing really changed in terms of how do you think your team is going to not win or lose, just approach November 29th?
More optimistic because I tweeted this out like during the game, which I thought it was a pretty good line. I pat myself on the back. I said there are Michigan games everywhere for those with eyes to see, and like Ohio State started out and they scored a touchdown, and everybody went, "Oh, one of those games," and then they kicked a field goal. And then Penn State scored, and it's like, huh, well, this is not going maybe as I thought. And we mentioned that, and I brought up that moment earlier, like where we looked at each other, we're like, should Ohio State be up by more? And it's like, well, they scored 10 points on 2 drives. Like, sure, you don't win games with field goals, but 11 plays, 89 yards, touchdown, 11 plays, 71 yards, field goal. And then they went 6 plays, 75 yards, touchdown. They had 4, not counting the kneel down to end the half, which doesn't count as a possession because there was 20 seconds left. Not counting that, you had 4 first half possessions and you scored 17 points against the defense that gave you some trouble. And I think that's maybe more of the way that we can talk about it. But like they came right out of half, touchdown, 5 plays, 75 yards, touchdown, 7 plays, 84 yards. And then in the fourth quarter, they were up by 17, punt, touchdown, end of game. They just kind of ran out the clock. They were trying to get out of there. Totally fair. But the reason why I think people were nervous at halftime was because, like I said, they saw elements of the Michigan game. Okay, they're playing a team that's overmatched. They should be up by more. They're not. They have a turnover in their own end. I think fans should be pretty optimistic about Michigan. I mean, again, I bring this up all the time. I picked them to lose to Texas and then run the table the rest of the way. And my reasoning was, there were a lot of people that were like, "Oh, I can never pick them to beat Michigan ever again." It's like, I think the national championship run changed some things, and Stefan and Steven will both agree with me that we are seeing a different style of Ryan Day, or at least a different flavor than we saw last year. Steven, especially for his multiple years on the beat, like we're seeing a different Ryan Day where he gets to the podium and somebody goes, "Assess your overall team performance." And he goes, "That dang fumble." And he just starts like ranting about the fumble. Like this is not a Ryan Day that is not going to, or that is going to be conservative like that again. I think I cannot imagine that they go to Michigan and they do the same thing that they did. Like somebody brought this up. It's not, I don't know if it's necessarily a conservative call. I think that's a decent point where it's like, it's a drive starter. What's the difference between that and a middle screen to Brandon Inniss where you're supposed to get 5 or something? Or you get the clock running and then you get yourself moving, right? You put Penn State on their heels a little bit. You want the clock moving so it's not a set situation. You just expect a senior running back to hang on to the ball, and he didn't. So, like, I don't think that would replicate again. And who knows? Maybe Ohio State's up 20-7. Ryan Day seemed to indicate like we were okay with any kind of points on that drive. He said we weren't going to be overly aggressive, but they go up 20-7, and then all of a sudden maybe it's 27-7 coming out of half, and it's like, what's the deal? So They threw the ball when they had to. They didn't fall into the pitfalls of it's a matchup game. We have to play to win it at the end. They didn't do that. They still threw the ball 9 times more than they ran the ball through 9 times more than they threw it because they were winning. Like when you're winning, you can run the ball. You can put yourself in those positions a little bit. And because you threw it all over the yard, defenses have to respect it. So I felt good about Ohio State, Michigan coming into the year. And the reason I say that is because I just wanted that context out there. It's like, I have always felt good about this. This was not a today changed my mind thing, but Ohio State knew what they had to do. They were aggressive. They took shots. And it wasn't even a Knowles thing. It wasn't like a let's twist the knife on Jim like the Jumbotron guy did at the stadium today where they kept showing him. They came out there with a plan to throw the daggum football. And they threw the daggum football. And they threw it all over the yard. And that's the way that they need to beat Michigan. One team just has winged helmets. One team wears white helmets. If they do that in another matchup game, in another game that means all that, I don't care that they have the mental or the emotional edge. Ohio State will win the football game if they come out slinging like that. If they come out with that mentality of we're going to throw it, we'll run it occasionally, we're going to show a bunch of different stuff, they're going to beat Michigan. They're going to beat Michigan maybe badly if they do that. If they go out there and do that, mentally, they show up the same way. Emotionally, they show up the same way. Hey, we're going to throw it. We're going to lean into what we do best. We're not going to do this chicanery with, the run game. And we're not going to try all this stuff. And I know I'm ranting now, but if they show up like today, Ohio State fans at about 3:30 will be texting our line saying, I'm so happy this rocks. I can't believe we just beat the snot out of Michigan. This is great.
I'll add to that as well. Because I don't want to. What you said about the football stuff is 100% true. So I'm not gonna repeat that. I think the mental side of it too. Like you mentioned the Jim Knowles thing and the emotional factor of that. And I'm sure in the lead ups to the game, whether it be in the off season, whether it be this week, there was a bit of that. We saw that from Ryan Day. And then when the game started, they kind of just played football. And that's also what you need in the Michigan game, right? Like there is going to be a ton of emotion. There's been a lot of talk this offseason about that being the one thing that, Ryan Day still hasn't checked off, especially last season, like we're winning a national title, not beating Michigan. Like, yeah, that's all part of it in the X's and O's too. But it's like there was emotion attached to this game, and Ohio State kind of just put that aside and just won the football game. And I think if you're an Ohio State fan, like that's what you hope to see in Ann Arbor. It's like up until kickoff, have all the emotion. Talk about how much you hate Michigan every second of every day. The moment the ball is snapped, don't let your emotion of we're going to beat them this way. Don't let that carry into it, right? Like they didn't come into this be like, we need to beat the hell out of Jim Knowles this way. Just play your game and you're going to do that. Jim Knowles can't slow you down. There's nothing he can call that's going to slow down Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. So when you get into the Michigan game, bring all that stuff into it. And the moment the ball is kicked, let it go. Like play the football game, and then post game you can talk all the smack you want because you didn't let the emotion. It's Ryan Day's thing, right? You let execution fuel emotion. Like execute, and then you'll be happy afterward. Don't be sitting there being like, "Man, I hate these guys. I want to run it right in their face." Then you're letting emotion get in the way of your decision making.
Do you guys remember as a kid when you would do like a public speaking event and you would be like, oh no, I'm nervous. And they would say, imagine the audience in their underwear. Maybe not that. Imagine them in a different uniform. And you'll be fine. Like you don't have to let it mentally and emotionally control you.
Yeah. And it was never like, imagine it's not Jim Knowles calling plays. Like that's kind of what it felt like today. It kind of felt like they were just offensively dominating a defense that isn't as good as them.
Is that true? Is that what happened today? And I'm not saying it didn't have. I didn't realize they only run 10 plays in the second quarter. Like they had the ball for 4 minutes because Ohio State's defense couldn't get off the field, and Penn State had that 15-play drive. So they ran 29 first half plays. And in fact, Stefan, I think that's what we're gonna do for the Monday pod is like go watch all 29 of those plays because you made a point when we were sitting up here today. And you were talking about how doing all this tinkering, only this time it worked. And I think that's a very different conversation than just as simple as like they came out and set fire and threw the ball all over the place. They threw it 9 times in the first quarter and they ran it 10 times. They threw it 5 times in the second quarter and they ran it 5 times. So in the first half, 14 throws, 15 runs. So even by that logic of, oh, of course they ran it more than they threw it, they were winning. They ran it more than they threw it in the first half. It's not for me, it's never been about just throw the ball everywhere. It's about what you do when you're throwing the ball. It's about when it feels like your offense the first couple of weeks was, we're going to run the ball on first down, maybe get a yard, maybe not. We're going to run the ball on second down, maybe get 3 or 4 yards, maybe not. And then it's all of a sudden 3rd and long, and you're asking your redshirt freshman quarterback to drop back there and throw dimes. And he was doing that fine, but it just didn't feel as productive as it could have felt. So when they started doing all that tinkering on top of what they were calling in the play calling, it was like, that's not great. This is not a great efficient way to run offense. And I am almost, the reason why I want us to go back through these 29 plays for Monday, Stefan, is because there's an element of, if we rewatch this play and we put it in the context of down distance, the entire scenario is like, okay, do we think it was the right decision? Like, are we screaming going, yo, you should have ran the ball here? Yo, you should have thrown the ball here, right? No, like what this felt like the first time Brian Hartline really was in a groove as a play caller. And I think that is more important than just do this or just do that, because that's part of the Michigan thing. Is it didn't feel like Chip Kelly was in a groove for the Michigan game. It just felt like he was throwing stuff at the wall and it wasn't working. And because the stuff he was throwing at the wall was the opposite of what we should do, if that's all I do is throw at the wall, literally and figuratively speaking, that's when you got yourself into some trouble. This was Brian Hartline's best game as a play caller. And I don't think it was conservative. It was purposeful with everything they did. I felt like everything they did had a purpose. And for the most part, I am almost wondering, and when we rewatch this first half, the first 29 plays of the game, are we going to walk away saying that like 25 of them made sense? They were purposeful. They were done with the point of being productive, and it built on itself. Everything they did, it didn't feel like they wasted plays, right? And there have been times this year where it felt like they've wasted plays. Julian Sayin threw the ball 9 times in the second half and completed all 9 of them for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. This dude is ridiculous. Just beat Michigan and you win the national championship, but not to get it's. So if you're worried about the conservativeness, I don't know if I'm going to sit here on this podcast today and try to like talk you off that ledge. Not after 4 losses. I don't know if I would be doing you. I almost feel like it wouldn't do anybody any good to say, oh yeah, they cheated Penn State this way, and so that means they're going to treat Michigan this way. Penn State's, I understand they're like division rivals because they were in the same division in the Big Ten for a long time. They're not Michigan. And so to say, oh, just act like they don't have wing helmets on, you're not wrong. We're being facetious, obviously, because we've all done that. Like, oh, I believe in Ohio State in blue wing helmets on it. But there's a reason we say that, right? There's a reason we call this the biggest rivalry in sports. So I'm not going to say that what you saw today should make you feel any more or less confident about what we're going to see against Michigan. I will say that if they don't do this against Michigan, it's even more of a reason why you might pull your hair out. But I will say that I think you saw enough from Brian Hartline in his 8th game as a play caller to feel confident that he is not only that he knows what he's doing, but he's starting to find the rhythm. He's starting to find a groove on how he wants to do things. What does they say all the time? Stuff like, what are we trying to get done? In the first 7 weeks, there were, okay, we're trying to get the run game. That's what we're working on today. So, like, if you're looking for Julian to throw it 30 times, he's not going to do it because we need to figure out how to run the freaking ball. And then you got games like the Grambling game and the Wisconsin game where it's like, oh, yo, we're throwing it 40 times today. And our run game didn't look great, but it's because that's not what we're thinking about. We're just trying to we're just trying to throw it. Julian, pull it. If it's an RPO, focus on the pass part of that RPO more than the run part of that RPO. If it's any room for wiggle room, because what did he say after that game? We just wanted to see where we were. Because now you get to the Penn State game, which unfortunately Penn State took some of the air out of the bubble of this game because they lost 4 straight. So the aura of the game wasn't what it needed to be. But this was always a checkpoint of game 1 checkpoint was like, let's just win the game. And then we can figure out our issues with a win, right? That's better than having to figure out these issues with a loss. The second checkpoint was always going to be November 1st, where it's like, we're going to do everything today. We're going to do 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. We're going to go by formation at the 26-yard line. We're going to 5 wide it, right? We're going to push the ball down the field. We're going to go intermediate. Hey, Isaiah West, you're going to get a couple of carries. Buckeye Ryan, you're saying, did he get one in the second half? I don't remember off the top of my head if he got a carry in the second half. That's ongoing. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, I know for a fact, and Gillis can back me up on this, they know who their best 2 running backs are. So if you're worried about like why, they know. And when they get to December, I promise you, the 2 guys that we all like, they see what we see. So the 2 guys you think deserve to get the ball, I promise you, December is going to get here, and those 2 guys are getting the ball. I had the right conversations this week with people where like, that's not a worry of mine. This is not about give these guys. They're still 18, and you don't want to kill them in November, but they are fully aware of who their best players are. And the conversation I had with somebody was very, very eye-opening to that point. But today was the first day, 8 games in, where it felt like we saw everything. We saw the pass game. We saw some explosive runs. It wasn't perfect, right? And I thought the interior offensive line didn't have a great day. But in terms of Brian Hartline, the play caller, I saw everything I needed to see. Now go do it against the Maize and Blue in Ann Arbor. That doesn't go away until it happens. But at least today showed you it was possible for Brian Hartline to do this. I don't know if you can ever feel 100% confident that he's going to do it until he does it. And you got 30 days. Well, not actually like 28 days to see if he's actually going to do that. And I think they checked off what the to-do list of November 1st was always going to be. Even if Penn State didn't add the let's get out of here with a top 5 win part of it to the conversation.
And, you're right. Like the way that I was talking about that conversation with, I want to be clear with like should you feel better or worse? That's an objective standpoint. I don't want like, I understand the worst thing that you can tell somebody. The worst thing you could tell somebody that's nervous about something is, just don't be nervous, dude. It'll be fine. Like, have you ever had that where like you'll be sitting around and it's like, oh, like you gotta, make this phone call. You gotta go talk to this person. You gotta do something. It's like, dude, just don't freak out about it, man. It's fine. It's like, that doesn't help me because I'm currently freaking out about it. It's like Ohio State could run into that game 11-0. Michigan could be down to a 9th string quarterback who was actually a kicker, and they're just like, hey, I don't know, guys, like this is nerve-wracking. I get it. So like what I want to be clear is like, I'm not telling people like, oh, you can't be nervous about this game, and like I understand why you are, but like I think there were signs of growth there and signs of positivity, because like you said, Stephen, like we were talking to people like in the building this week, it's like they know what's up. Like football coaches, I know there are some that maybe know less than others, but football coaches generally know football, and Ohio State football coaches know football.
Yeah, but like that's not.
They're 18 years old, and like, they are going to get to their best players at that game.
Yeah, but it's not about like we know they know ball. They're getting paid millions of dollars to do this. That's not the preface of why Buckeye Ryan is asking that. He's asking that because there have been it's Ryan. Well, I don't know, but that's not the point. There have been times in the past where Ohio State has not known who its best players are. I remember the Minnesota game in 2021 when after that game and they were line changing on defense, Brian Day got flat out asked, do you know who your best players are on defense? And he did not give an answer that led to the words yes. Right? They didn't know who their best running backs were on October on August 31st, on September 30th. Or anyway, shout out to you, Buckeye Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, they didn't know these answers. And why would they? Why would they know that answer? None of these guys had ever played football before other than CJ Donaldson, and he's a very different running back than what he was in West Virginia. Matt Patricia probably didn't fully know who his best players were on that defense. Why would he? It's 8 new starters on the defense. They thought maybe Julian Sayin was a very good quarterback, but were you 100% certain? We were, because I mean, we're media members. Of course we were, right? Stefan, you and I were having conversations about Julian Sayin winning the Heisman 6 months ago, where we were like, hey, if we get to November 1st, is he one of the best quarterbacks in college football? We were both like, yeah, of course he is. What kind of crazy question is that? And here we are. He's probably the best quarterback in college football. But they didn't think that because they can't think the way we think. They have to account for every possible thing. So they didn't know that. It's November 1st, and they do know that. They also have a plan to make sure that their best players are playing football for them on January 1st in Pasadena, on January 19th in South Florida, because that's just as important as it is anything else. Bo Jackson didn't need to carry the ball more than 13 times for Ohio State to win this football game. Cool. Is there going to be a game where he needs to carry it 20? Maybe. I don't know. He carried it 17 against Washington, and that was enough. But whatever gets them to the playoff, that's what they're going to do every single week. It was just nice to see them put it all together for the first time this year. Passing game, running game, how much control they gave to Julian Sayin. I didn't like that Penn State got a 15-play drive off, but also, to Tyler's point, Penn State has 100 yards. So, all right, you had a 15-play drive. Kudos to you. You also got another touchdown that was essentially given to you because, Gillis, you said it. Ryan Day's been making a big deal about true freshmen and ball security. And I just think it's ironic that the 5th-year senior running back is the guy who fumbled. And that's not to rag on CJ Donaldson, just like Ryan Day's not to. But that's a thing, right? You gave a team an extra possession that they should not have had when you probably should have been up 24-7 at halftime. And instead, you're up 17-14 at halftime because you gave somebody prime position. And I mean, Penn State's not incompetent. They're just having a bad year. Is Georgia losing? Brown just said, I hate Georgia. Did they lose?
No, they're
winning.
They're making a late comeback. He's saying he hates Georgia because they keep getting away with it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look, Florida's getting the ball back. You never know.
I know. We do know. We know. It's okay. We know. College football playoff talk. We know. Yeah. We know. We know.
I do have the Georgia game on. I'm also watching the end of this Michigan State Minnesota game. Been a terrific game. If anybody's watching with sound on, can you tell me what just happened with the officiating? Because I think Big Ten refs might have just realized they messed up on a PI call and just kind of said, "Ooh, my bad, PJ Fleck," and then took the flag back after he yelled at them. So,
are all the commissioners making calls today? Because Petiti definitely made a call. Caleb Dowell should not be playing.
That was a definite targeting, and
come on. We should be getting ready to learn Fahim Delane, but it's fine. It's got away with it, so it's whatever. Last question. College football playoff rankings come out on Tuesday, first of the year, and the only ones that matter to Ohio State and its fan base are the first ones, the last ones, and the ones that come out if Ohio State loses, the very next ones, because those are about telling us what the committee is thinking about Ohio State and how they're viewing things. I asked our texters in the middle of the game. It was they were winning the game, but I was like, hey, man, if this keeps up, do you think Ohio State's going to be I didn't ask it, should they be? Do they deserve to be? I asked, do you think they actually are going to be the number one team? Here's a couple of answers. From the 386, if we hold Penn State to 14 the rest of the game and put up 1 or 2 more TDs, I don't see why they lose the number one spot. Obviously, that's what played out here. From Melissa in Charleston, South Carolina, yep, absolutely yes. No other team has looked as good as this team, period. And we scheduled a hard season. Can't help what happens after day one in the rankings, but we scheduled hard teams on purpose. I am super proud of this team and have not seen any other team look this good consistently. A couple others from the 513, yes, but given an undefeated SEC team with a tougher schedule and OSU looking marginally vulnerable, I think Texas A&M will be number one, and yes, that's even with the close wins versus bad SEC teams. Not really deserving, but that doesn't matter for the SEC. I love it when people stick it to the SEC. And then from the 614, Stephen, yes, the Buckeyes deserve to be number one, but we all saw last year it doesn't mean anything. Bucks finished fourth in the Big Ten and were the 8th seed in the playoff, and they won it all. It's about staying healthy, making the playoff, and playing your best football when you reach the postseason. I agree with all those things, even the SEC thing. I just like when people stick it to the SEC. I'm all about sticking it to the SEC. Who's number one on Tuesday, Andrew?
I think it's Ohio State. I think they have enough quality where going into it, I think you're going to feel, all right, you know what? Has their schedule fallen apart? Yes. Has their strength of schedule, I think, like from what it was 2 months ago? Yeah. Like Texas, there was a very real chance that they played the preseason number one and the number one team in the country in week one and the number one team in the country 2 months later. There was a very real possibility that Ohio State, they won that game and sure, but then Penn State could have taken it back if they beat Oregon, right? There was always that possibility of Penn State being up there, or at least number two. It's not taking away from anything from Ohio State to say that, but I do think the eye test is going to matter. I think Ohio State having these superstars on both sides of the ball is going to matter. So I think it's Ohio State. I would probably guess Indiana 2, but it would not shock me if it's A&M 2. Where Ohio State fans need to be on the lookout for is where A&M is ranked, because A&M is they're unique because they're undefeated, and like you said, SEC. Well, the SEC gets the benefit of the doubt, and they've also had a schedule that would lead them to, okay, maybe this is, not that great. They avoided some of the big boys. They avoided Alabama. They avoid Georgia, but they did go on the road. And they fired Brian Kelly. They went on the road. They beat Notre Dame. They play on the road at Missouri next week, coming off of a bye. They have SoCon Saturday, and then they play Texas on Black Friday at 7:30. And where this gets interesting to me is that if A&M is ranked 1 or 2, that's where it gets interesting. So I think Ohio State's going to have them. I think Ohio State's going to edge them out, but they will have a common opponent with Ohio State later in the year when they play Texas at home on Black Friday night. And then they will have an SEC championship game. So if you're Ohio State, the number one thing you're looking for is that you're above A&M. And if you're above A&M, you have a clear shot to the number one seed in the college football playoff. Even if you're number 2 and A&M is number 3, you just got to be ahead of A&M, because then you eliminate all doubt of A&M running the table and, hey, well, they beat Texas by more and they had a better blah, 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 blah. You avoid all that minutia talk. And that's what I'm looking out for. I'm looking out for where Ohio State's ranked, obviously, which I think is going to be 1. And if they're above A&M, it's clear sailing to number 1 if you can run the table.
I think it's going to be Indiana 1.
Give me your order.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Indiana 1, Ohio State 2, Texas A&M 3. I think it's going to end up being a clear shot of whoever wins the Big Ten title game, assuming Indiana and Ohio State win out. That team is going to have the number 1 seed. So I'm not worried about Indiana and Ohio State being 1 and 2. I'm fairly confident that that'll happen. I do think I think what's important there is the text that you read, Stephen, pointed out Ohio State's going to keep the number 1 spot. You have to think about it in a context different than the AP poll and the coaches poll. There's no keeping the number 1 seed. This is the first rankings. So you have to look at the entire body of work as opposed to a week by week thing that I think we see with the AP poll a bit. And for that reason, I think Indiana's going to be 1, because I think they're just going to say Indiana has the best win. I think that's going to carry some weight, because I think Oregon's going to be, depending on how this Georgia game finishes, Oregon might be top 5. They're at the worst, top 6, top 7 team. So I think right now eye test probably, but it's even hard to say that because it's like Indiana has, beaten the crap out of everyone that they've played, minus, some struggles that they had at Iowa. So like Indiana's got good eye test and I think a good resume point, which I think will result in them being 1 and Ohio State being 2. Would not shock me the other way around, right? Like wouldn't like I think things have played out relatively well for Ohio State with the Texas game, because I think Texas they just had, ranked win against Vandy, whatever you think of Vandy. Like everything that's happened since the Florida loss has been good for Texas, which has been good for Ohio State in turn. So I think that's fine. I think the win at Oregon is just going to have some weight. So I've been saying that I think Indiana is going to be number 1 in these first rankings, but I think Ohio State's going to be number 2, and those two teams will play for, ultimately the number 1 seed.
I think if Indiana and Ohio State, regardless of the order, are 1 and 2, the Big Ten's getting the number 1 seed. That's all he just told us.
Yeah.
In fact, I think if one of them is 1 and one of them is 3, the Big Ten's getting the number 1 seed. That's all it really told us. But one of those 3, like, really emphasizes that point, right? I think if one being 1, one being 3, regardless of which one is which, and Texas A&M being 2, at least cracks the door a little bit of like the right. If Texas A&M runs the table and they're undefeated, maybe the committee thinks about moving them up to 1, right? But I don't think that's actually what's going to happen. I think whichever, if the SEC's undefeated team is number 1, all right, that's an uphill battle to climb for the Big Ten. If the Big Ten's undefeated team is number 1, then the Big Ten's getting the number 1 seed. From an Ohio State perspective, I think it's this is what I wrote at the buzzer. I think it comes down to one question for these Tuesday rankings, and that's what is more important to the committee. Because you're right, Stefan, it is a resume conversation, which is why I vote in my AP poll the way I do. But it's the eye test part of it is not, they watch football games, right? They're not just seeing the end results and going, oh, okay, well, that's what it is. It's a combination of those. It's a bunch of others too, but it really, if you want to really boil it down, it's resume and eye test, right? And some years they lean a little more resume. Some years they lean a little more eye test. I just think this depends on what the field looks like, right? Like, I think there's like Oregon doesn't really have a great resume, but you watch Oregon play football, they're a damn good football team, right? So it's not just about the top 3. It's going to be 1 through, really, I think 1 through 25. This is going to be interesting first rankings because it's been a crapshoot this year in college football in a good way. I think it's made the season more entertaining because there's more teams more competitive this year. But I think for the term of Ohio State, the committee has to answer the question of, if you put Ohio State versus Texas A&M, if you did Ohio State versus Indiana on a neutral field, who do you think would win the football game? If they decide to ask that question, Ohio State is 100% going to be number 1. And that's not saying that if they ask other questions, they won't be. But I think that fundamental question, it's an if question, and I know this is not ESPN and it's not Disney. You didn't take you take YouTube TV away from you, but we're on YouTube, so we don't mind sharing with YouTube. But I think that's it. I mean, the defense looks amazing. There's stars, there's returning stars like Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles. There's new stars like Carnell Wade and Arvell Roots and Caden McDonald and Bo Jackson and Austin Saraveld and Jalen McClain and Jermaine Matthews. And I mean, right, there's all of that. There's nothing wrong. There's no hole in this team. Yeah, Penn State found some success running to left today. I'm off guard on that. Also, every defense has an escape hatch. There's no perfect defense and there's no perfect offense, but there is nothing fundamentally wrong with Ohio State. The standard's just a standard, so we have to find things to poke at. But if you compare the field, there is no issue. You want talent? There's NFL players all over the place. You want an elite passing attack? They can throw the ball all over the place. You want some explosive runs? Healthy Bo Jackson. Let me introduce you to him. You want a defense that's impossible to score on, even if you get down to the 1-yard line? They've been doing that for 2 years now. They will literally have a player who's an icon in this program's history because of that situation of getting down to the 1-yard line and you still can't score, right? You want some elite cornerback play? I mean, Jermaine and and Davis are on a short list of who's the best cornerback tandem in college football. I don't think they're number one, but they're on a short list of that. Arvell and Sonny are the best linebacker tandem in college football. The defensive line, every week, somebody new, right? Kenyatta Jackson had his day today. Caden Curry has 7 sacks this year. And every week, it's a new dude. Like, there's no problems with this team. And so if being the most complete team in college football and being bar none the team everybody would pick right now of who can run the gauntlet and win 3 or 4 straight games and win a natty, this team, then that's who the committee puts number one. If resume is the thing that is bar none the way they lean, then it probably is going to be Indiana because nobody has a win like that. Ohio State should have 2 wins like that, but they don't. Because I do think even if they were both at home, if Penn State and Texas were still Penn State and Texas in the preseason, I think having 2 top 5 wins is better than having 1 top 5 win on the road, even if they're at home, right? But that's not what they have. It's not their fault. But I do think Texas winning the day helps. I think Miami losing hurts Notre Dame. So by proxy kind of hurts Texas A&M a little bit as well. So I think Ohio State got the right help, and they've just looked better than everybody. And sometimes that's enough, and that might be the number 1 seed. 614-350-3315. When that information comes out, that's the first place we'll go with it. Thank you to everybody who joined us on this live today. We also go live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. if you can join us. If you're just at work, just pop on the YouTube real quick. We yell, we scream, we talk a lot of Ohio State football. And that's it, man. 8-0 Buckeyes. This is their initial resume for the College Football Playoff Committee. Tomorrow, the AP poll comes out, and it's the last time you're allowed to scream at me for my voting. And after that, you got to scream at some people in Texas for their voting. Please stop screaming. Actually, I don't care. You can scream at me. We're going to go watch some mid-SEC teams now because the SEC is mid. And people bring this up. He said, I'm not watching that nasty football. Here's the deal. I'll say this. My problem with the SEC isn't that like the Big Ten is a superior conference, though they have won the last 2 national championships. Here's my problem, and I think this is a lot of people's problem with the SEC. The Big Ten doesn't act like all of its teams are good. They understand that there are tiers. There's levels to this. There's where Ohio State and Indiana and Oregon are living right now. Then there's where Illinois and Washington and maybe Michigan and I think Minnesota and Iowa are kind of living right now, and Nebraska. And then there's where the bottom of the conference is living. They understand there's a high class, middle class, lower class. The problem with the SEC is they don't understand that they are no different than the Big Ten when it comes to that. There are the Alabamas and the Texas A&Ms. And then there's where I think Georgia's kind of flirting with both of those territories, though. I mean, they're like they're in a competitive game with a low class team right now. That's the thing. They don't there's tiers. So stop acting like your conference has 11 good teams. It doesn't. It has the same amount of really good teams as the Big Ten has. And that's okay. That was an unnecessary rant. 614-350-3315. 2-week free $3.99 after that. Thank you for bearing with me. This internet problem should be fixed by Sunday morning. So by the time Stefan and I sit down and record, this will no longer be an issue. But that's that. Ohio State 38, Penn State 14 as the Bucks improved to 8-0 on the season. For Stefan, Krajisnik, and Andrew Gillis. Talk to you guys later.